was a good pairing that the committee really wanted to work on. 7 is your procedures, so it's all these fun flow charts in there, and it goes through all the procedures. And then 8 is definitions. We define lots and lots of great things in there. So your current ordinances helpful, and everything is hyperlinked in the document, so it says, see section whatever, it's hyperlinked and it pulls you right to that page. Okay, so we're going to run through some of these chapters, some in more depth than others, right? The first chapter, again, just talks about our general provisions. So those are some of our introductory provisions, like our jurisdiction and basically our authorization. How do we have the power to do this? That second section in there talks about if there's an application that's been submitted, and then you adopt this thing, right? We don't make them start over, right? They've already submitted a complete application. They get to continue upon their path, the rules in place that were when they started. And then powers and duties. So this is your administrator, which is your planning director, planning commission, and BZA. Like, what are their powers and duties? And that's really pulling from state statute stuff. So I'm not going to go into details in this chapter today, but if you have questions, we definitely can. I'm just going to try to focus some of our time on things that might be more discretionary, right? We can't change state statute quite that easily. So our second chapter, that's the district one. That's a big one. So first section in that is general provisions. It talks about, again, it doesn't matter where you are, you still have to follow our floodplain regulations, right? You still have to follow all of our basic things. You either still have to have sewer or water. You still have to, so outline some of the basics within that stuff, within that. And then for each of our zoning districts, we go through, and I'm going to show you in just a minute, we talk about a purpose, the general standards, land uses, and development standards. So I'm going to show you an example, and we're going to walk through all of those for that in just a minute. So that goes through everything, and then we also have our table of permitted and special exception or conditional uses that we'll go through here too. So that's kind of everything in chapter 2. As we get started on this one, and this is the one we'll probably I have the most slides on, so if we spend the most time on chapter 2, and don't worry about that, we're going to get through these here still. So chapter 2, I wanted to show you kind of your current zoning districts and what the new one is, if that makes sense, because that's always a very common and legitimate question is like, well, I was zoned this, so what happens now? So your existing zoning map, I can always say it's converted, right? It's not like we're changing the districts on everything, but if it was AG and now R1, it might have been called R4 before, right? It's a name kind of change. I'm going to walk through each one of these just so you can kind of see this. Your current district is Ag, so it's the one on the far side here, and the cliff side, that is your new district, so name didn't change. Again, we can walk through the standards here. A couple of the standards might have shifted here or there, but Ag is Ag still. Residential agricultural is still the same thing. Hillside is still the same thing. Open space is still the same thing. Okay, finally I have something that's going to change here. Low density residential, it was currently called R4, which was definitely probably a previous way of naming things, it was by density, right? So generally you were allowed 4 units per acre. Not really, because when you start to look at taking out roads and things, but that was definitely a 80s, 90s practice of naming residential districts. We're gonna call it R1 now. So that's much more of this kind of standard out there. So again, your name's gonna change on the map here. R8 is now R2. So again, this is just kind of aligning with more modern practices. R32 is just now called R3. So it's R1, 2, 3. That's more standard. The one thing other here is that you have a residential manufactured home park district right now. That is going to just be wrapped into your R3 district. It's not permitted by right. It's still a special exception. So it's not something that's gonna, I don't think, cause issues. That is definitely a more modern practice with the amount of changes in state statute in the last 7-ish years. We haven't really had significant changes in the last 2 years on these statutes, but it's starting to kind of push that way as well. So it's not permitted by right. When you look in your use district, it is a special exception, which is what you guys currently call conditional uses. We'll go through that here in a minute. But we'll bring those into an R3 district. And I believe that's what the county's is as well at the moment, if I'm remembering off the top of my head. Your HDR district is still your HDR, right? That's the historic residential. But we have 2 districts we're going to wrap into that HDR. The professional, PRO, which is professional research and office, there's only 6 parcels that are zoned that, and it's like the tourism building block. It's like right there on the edge of CBD. It's got a lot of HDR around it and some industrial actually. So that it would be that use would be permitted by special exception or conditional use, so that's fine. I mean, that's not non-conforming. We don't want to create a bunch of non-conformities here. That's the goal too. And then the specialty district. This was like a kind of mix of a lot of things. It was really a lot of residential. When we went through all the blocks that had those, it's mainly residential or these little small like businesses in a house, right? And so again, HDR would allow that business in a house by a special exception conditional use. So we're going to bring that in there so it's not going to create non-conformities there either. So riverfront, I didn't touch that one. Local business is still local business. General business is still general business. CBD is still CBD. We did add one new district called aviation business. So this is under the industrial districts. This is only going to be the parcels at the airport, owned by the airport. And that is just to help alleviate some FAA, things in terms of just regulations. We'll go through those regulations here in a minute, but that was the intent of that. Your manufacturing, the name changed to light industrial instead of manufacturing. Again, that's a name that was much more used in the 80s and 90s, and it's more than just manufacturing nowadays. So, and then the same thing with heavy. We changed it from manufacturing to industrial and use the I1, I2. And then the last thing is PUD. You have one today, and we're going to have PUDs in the future. Does that make sense? Josh?
On the pro district today,
give you a
how does...
the way everybody can hear you.
Yeah.
And then the reason we're using the microphone is so that it'll translate to the streaming. Okay.
For the pro district, how does it vary today from general business?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not used because it's that one half a block or block down by the tourism kind of building and area. And I can go through some of those regulations. It's really unclear. I don't know why it's in there, honestly, because it's not used. Okay. It's not significantly different from some of your other districts. I think that's why it's never been used. They either pick local business or general business. And I don't know the history on why just those, I think it's like 6 parcels were zoned that. I don't know the history on that either. Okay. So I definitely think it's not needed.
All right, thanks.
By all means. Okay. All right. So the one other one I was going to touch on then before we get into the standards for each of these districts is overlays. So we are going to establishing 3 overlays, but these overlays are already in effect by other ordinances, right? So these overlays are really being used as like red flags so that when we look at a zoning map and a property owner or a developer, whoever it may be, looks at a business, they look at the map, they're like, ooh, I'm in a floodplain. Okay, better go pay attention to that, right? And also staff. It helps the staff, when they look at it, they're like, oh, floodplain, go visit my friends at DNR. It helps to alleviate issues with things getting missed is the goal here. So the first one is a flood hazard overlay. Whether you adopt the overlay or not, the same regulations are in effect. You have a floodplain ordinance already, and you have DNR and FEMA. I mean, so all this is saying is we're mirroring DNR flood hazard zones, and we're just putting it on our map as an overlay to say, if you're in that, you gotta go comply, right, with local floodplain ordinance and with the state feds. So whether you adopt it or not, it's still in effect. It just is helpful when you see it on a zoning map. It helps definitely staff too to be able to recognize and say, oh, I need to make sure it's one more level of checkpoint. The historic district overlay, so same thing here. This is again in effect already. You already have, that's a standalone ordinance, so it's not being repealed by this. So your board of review, all those design standards, we're just making it, again, it's another layer. If a homeowner or someone buys a house, right, in the historic district, and they have no idea they're in the historic district, this helps hopefully one more place you can catch that, right? And then the final one is airport protection overlay. You don't necessarily have this as a local ordinance, but this is the federal government. So FAA/NDOT Office of Aviation. Whether we put a lot of this in effect, whether we put this in effect today, most of this is already going to be regulated. So it's looking at height zones. We can't have things that interfere with approach zones, and then noise zones. We don't want to have someone move next to the airport and then complain the airport is really loud. So we'll go through those here in a minute too. So whether we adopt those overlays or not, they're largely in effect anyway. Okay. So on your districts, when you look through the chapters, through the actual report here or document, each district has a page. It's going to have a purpose for that district. It's going to give us some general standards, which are very similar throughout all of those. It's going to reference this little handy dandy section, right? And then it's going to give us the meat of development standards, right? So it's going to tell us what are my setbacks, what's my height, what's the lot area, all that fun stuff is going to be in one little table versus kind of spread out. So we're going to run through each district. That's good with you guys. Again, this is going to be the larger chunk of the time. I'm going to make sure I'm not hitting any chords here. This conflicts. So we'll start at the rural kind of natural districts. The ag district is the first one. So we also have kind of graphics in there. Hopefully those are showing through. I can't see from the side here. That start to help explain like what is a setback, what is my lot width, how do I, those types of things. How do I measure building height? There's like 10 different ways you can measure building height. We've defined it very clear, so there's not going to be debate about that. So when we start to look at some of these, each district again will have this little table. I like putting it in tables because it's easy to find, right? I don't have to read a bunch of stuff. So here, we're looking at a 200-foot lot width, 1.15 acres minimum lot size, and then we're looking at 50-foot setback. And you'll notice in the rural kind of areas, one thing that's unique to Indiana is we don't have, our right-of-way is assumed right-of-way in a lot of the county area. In the cities, it's usually been dedicated, meaning it's been dedicated as right-of-way by a document that's been recorded. In our counties, we have what we call assumed right-of-way, and it's assumed from center of road, one rod on each side, really edge of pavement. It causes issues because your deed will read to the middle of the road though. So on some of our rural districts you'll see, or 80 feet from center of road if right-of-way is not dedicated, basically. Same thing we did with the county. That just helps us, if there's not dedicated right-of-way, we know where we're measuring from, because we don't want to measure from the center of the road if that's where your property line is. So then we're looking at setbacks. We've defined, again, your side and rear, and that's where we break out in most of these districts a primary versus accessory building. So your accessory might be like your shed or a detached garage or whatever it may be. It does not include fences. That's specified in here too. So it's a 20-foot side and a 10-foot rear. One thing we've done in this in the ordinance is impervious surface. So you guys use floor area ratio in some of your districts, not all. Floor area ratio is definitely not the preferred route to do. That looks at how much the comparison between my footprint, my floor area, all my floor, to the area of the lot. It's not as it's definitely not the preferred way. So we did 10% because again that's probably pretty reasonable within this district. And then we looked at structure height. So again, a lot of your districts don't have a structure height specified. So 40 feet or 50 for ag. Sometimes our silos and that sort of thing might need to be a little bit bigger. And then we also added in a minimum living area. That's something that you don't have in I don't think really most or any of your districts right now. And then we also specify public water and sewer, so we don't require that here. Doesn't mean you don't need a septic, right? You might have well or a septic. You still have to have some method of, disposing of waste. So I've kind of tried to interpret your current. Definitely look at the unclears, because those are the ones where it's not specified. So I'm defaulting to one sentence somewhere in your current ordinance that says an accessory structure shall not be closer than 3 feet to any lot line. That's how I would have to interpret that. So I wanted to kind of show you where we vary. So each one of these I'm going to throw up the current. And again, I tried to use it for the primary use of that district because a lot of them vary based on what your the use is, right, within that district. I will point out this is one where we did tweak and go up a little bit on the lot size, and that was really to mirror the county standards. So the county's minimum lot size and lot width in their ag district is 1.15 acres and 200 feet. So that's why it kind of mirrors that, to try to kind of make sure those are really kind of joined a little bit better together. Yes.
Does that give us any non-conforming current uses?
No, we did look at that. I don't think there's not too much ag zone if you take the proving grounds out, in some of those areas like up towards that are not going to be private, there's not a whole lot of ag in your buffer. Most things are zoned residential agricultural. So it didn't really mess with that. Okay? So then we'll go to residential agricultural. That's what most of your buffer is zoned. So we are looking at lot width of 75 feet with sewer or 150 without. And the minimum lot area is half an acre if you have sewer, or an acre without, because we got to put a septic in there. Front yard setback is looking at 40-foot setback, 20 for side yard and 20 for rear. And now we've moved up to 40% impervious because you've got a smaller lot. Yeah, that makes sense. Looking at a 40-foot height and then 20 for your accessory structures. We're not requiring sewer, but we are, public water is required. And the reason for that is public water is everywhere in the buffer. So everybody has access to that public water, is what it sounded like. Sewer, I'll give the caveat, it's not required, but if you're within 300 feet of a sewer line and they have capacity to put you on there, that's when you can by state statute be made to get on with new development, not existing stuff. New development, like a new subdivision comes in or something. So your current things on that, again, we tried to stay kind of in line with that one. The 150 feet is already in there. The 1 acre, your front yard varies a whole lot because it didn't have a good consistency. So it really is 25 feet for a dwelling. It's within 25 feet of the dwellings within 300 feet on each side. So you have to find the dwellings on each side. You have to be within 25 feet of the average of those setbacks, but it can't be closer than 40 feet on like local roads or 60 feet on, or collector arterial roads. That was a lot. We went with 40 feet. That's a pretty standard for this district. So questions on that one? But again, you get some unclear stuff. It doesn't specify a rear yard setback. Like your current ordinance, there's not a rear yard setback specified. So it's like, we need to specify that. Okay? I'm going to keep moving unless you got Josh.
There it is.
Okay.
So for the RA, there was not a need for the 50-foot limit for the agricultural silos and stuff?
No, because it's most of those lots, it doesn't appear that they are really ag. You know what I mean? It's much more of, it's kind of like me. I want to live in the country and have a couple acres, but I don't want to have all the ag stuff. You know what I mean? But my husband does want the huge barn. So, okay. So we get into hillside. I'm going to go ahead and throw up your current regs. That might be easier for you guys to kind of look at. So we didn't change the lot width. It's still 150. We still kept an acre as your minimum lot size. Your front yard, again, is that same varying. And I'm pulling the setback for the primary use, which would be a house, more or less, a lot of these. So it's within 25 feet of the average of the dwellings within 300 feet on each side, but not less than 40 or 60 feet depending on your road classification. So we again consolidated that to go with 40 feet, 20 for your side and 20 for your rear, and then went back down to 25% on impervious because you're on the hillside, and then we left the height the same but did measure it from the uphill elevation instead of the average. We measured it from the lowest finished floor elevation instead of the uphill because that gets a little tricky. Minimum living area here is 950 square feet, and then it is required to have water and sewer if you're in city limits, not if you're outside, but these are all, I believe, within city limits anyway, so. Okay. Open space, again, we didn't necessarily, we kind of looked at some of this. A lot of your open space parcels are non-conforming, or the uses aren't even permitted in those because like parks is not a permitted use there. So we did specify some things. So you currently have like 150-foot lot width and an acre minimum lot size. But if you look at the uses on open space, like we really want those to be open, right? So we didn't keep the minimum lot area or width just because if it wants to be open space, that's good, right? Let's grab that. And then we did reduce some of those minimum setbacks too, well, just for the front yard. So it was 50, we went to 15, because a lot of, when we look through the uses, that's not necessarily going to be an issue, I don't think. Your current side and rear, it's 15 feet plus 1 foot for every foot over 25 feet. So let's just be based on the uses, and it's because you weren't regulating height prior. You don't have a max height. Now we have a max height, right? So let's just negate that issue. It's now 30 feet. You currently don't have a maximum height in open space. So now that we have a max height, we can just set one setback that's much easier to understand. All right. Okay, next one, R1. So this is currently called R4. Still going to keep the same lot width. Your minimum lot area varies a little bit. So it's a 1/4 acre currently for single family or a 1/2 acre for a duplex, but not a maximum density of more than 4 units per acre. That's your current lot size. So we just went with the 1/4 acre. When we look at your front yard setback, we went with 30 feet. Again, right now it's 50 feet, which makes a lot of your R4, current R4s non-conforming. There are issues with a lot of platted subdivisions that just don't meet that. And if you're on a 1/4 acre lot and have to set back 50 feet, like the math doesn't really work very well. So we went with 30 feet, which is much more reasonable. We do talk about a 10-foot for single family attached if you have a rear loading garage. So that is a townhome, a row home, something of that nature, right? So we let them come a little closer to the road if they build their own little private alley in the back, right? To kind of get a little bit more of that feel. And then our side yards is 10 feet unless obviously you are a attached townhome, then you're going to be 0. And then your rear is 10 as well. So currently it's unclear on your rear. I would personally interpret that as 3 feet because it doesn't state it. You did have a 0.5 floor area ratio, which again, we're just translating that into impervious surface now instead. And max height of 40 feet for primary, 950 for a living area, and have to have water and sewer. Okay. I'm gonna keep going unless you guys holler out. Definitely if you have questions. I just don't want to go too fast if somebody has something. So your R2, which is currently your medium density one, we're still looking at the 40-foot lot width. Currently, your lot is, the way your lot area reads is a little weird. It says 5,400 square feet or 8 units per acre. We're still just saying 5,400 square feet per dwelling. So if it's single family, it's 5,400. If it's a 2-family, double it. Currently, your setback for the front yard is 20 to 40 feet based on road classification. We went with 20 because really the 40 is on your really big roads, and those have a lot of dedicated right-of-way, and we're kind of accounting for that anyway. When we look at then our side, we're looking at 8 feet. So that was brought in just a little bit, but again, trying to kind of match what is on a lot of these areas out there today. And then your rear is 10. That one, I would have guessed 3 because it's not stated. And then we're upping a little bit on the impervious just because we're getting a little more dense. And then 40-foot height and 950 square foot living area. R3, so this is our, I guess we have one more HDRs next too. But R3 is one of those that this, in our ordinance, again, it's apartments and that sort of thing. It's also the manufactured home parks as a conditional or special exception use with additional standards that we'll touch on in a minute. So this is looking again 30 feet or 25 for single family detached, so it's our townhomes because we need those to be a little more narrow. 4,400 square feet per dwelling unit, so whether you have one, that's 4,400. If you have 8 apartments, multiply that by 8. Front yard setback is going to be 20 feet or 10 foot if we have those townhomes with the rear garages. We did bring that in a little bit, but again, I think looking at the dimensions and what some of these lot areas are, that is very appropriate. So then your side yards for a single family, 2 family, it's 5 feet. All other things, it's going to be 10 feet. So that any apartments or anything like that, it'll be 10. And then 10 on the rear. And we did, this one it was one of the few districts you have a height specified, and it's 45, so we just left that. And then living area is 950 for single family and 2 family, and 600 square feet for multifamily. Okay, so HDR. Currently you don't have a minimum lot width or area, so we've left that alone as well. Currently it's really not stated that you have a 0-foot lot line when you look at the HDR parcels. A very significant portion of them have a 0-foot setback, like when you go down like West Main and that sort of thing. They're all built right on the lot line. I said it's unclear because it's not specified saying it has a 0-foot setback, so I would have to take the more conservative interpretation, right? So we went with what is out there today. So we did a 0-foot setback there, 3 on the side and rear yard, which is what it currently is, and then left the height the same as well. This is one thing that we did kind of work into. HDR, because it has some like commercial or retail uses by conditional use or special exception approval, we went ahead and I like to put a max ground floor area on those. So like if a little, business wants to move into a house or something, or that they can't build a huge structure, right? Like the idea here is it's that like small, quaint scale. So it's 10,000 square foot is the max ground floor area, the footprint of a structure. That just keeps that scale down too. And then 600 square feet for minimum living area. Yes.
Yeah, HDR.
Mike, sorry.
Thank you. In HDR on the BZA, a great deal of applications that we have, 30% maybe, are people who want to either rebuild a structure on an existing footprint, which is too close to their lot line, which under the old ordinance was 3 feet, or they want to add a porch or something in line with a wall that's too close to the lot line. Would it be possible to put in this ordinance a provision that in cases like that they wouldn't need a variance?
So the front setback is taken care of by saying 0. So that's good. We don't want them on the right of way. But you can go up to the right of way, that's fine. So that takes care of that one. The side then would be the only other thing. We left that at 3 because feeling like that was probably the most prevalent thing out there, and not necessarily wanting to do always a 0 on that. One thing we've done, or we can do, is sometimes I'll say again, it is 3 feet unless you look at the 3 parcels on either side of you, you can take their average setback. That's something that is common, like a practice will do. Just to say, okay, if your 3 neighbors on each side are doing it, then that's an alternative without having to get a variance. Is that something to kind of consider? Okay, I'm gonna make a note.
If we're up to me, I would just simply include language in HDR that just says that if outlining the conditions, that if you're rebuilding on an existing footprint that's non-conforming with your side yards, or if you're adding onto your building in line with an existing wall that's non-conforming, that a variance, the only approval needed would be something to the effect the building inspector or somebody approves it. It just seems to me that would save an awful lot of variance of standards applications that people
Yeah.
are stuck with.
And we can, so our non-conforming sections, so state statute changed a handful of years ago too, that if there's a legally non-conforming residential structure, it's still gonna be used as residential, it's not a floodplain, a couple things like that, it can be rebuilt as was. But one of those triggers is a historic district, and HDR is all in the historic district as well. So we can look at something like that. That might be a trigger instead of using the average, that we can allow those residential structures to be rebuilt as long as they were legal to begin with. I'm making it up. I'm making a note with the question mark. So I think that's something we can even look there. It might be a good way to do that too. Because we don't maybe want to permit new ones that weren't there before to do that. But if it was already there, we can have a little more ways that they can rebuild the same thing. Same footprint is what you're saying. Okay. Good thought. Okay. Riverfront District, I did not touch this one or change anything on that one. So I wrote what was in from what you currently have adopted. I just translated that. So I'm not going to go over that one necessarily because I just took your current ordinance and moved it into this one. Local business, then was the next one. So currently you don't have a lot with. We went ahead and added one on because I think, again, here it was probably a good practice because we're trying to really, in my mind, this is the smaller businesses, right? This is not the big guys. So we went ahead and added a 50-foot, or you had a 50-foot, sorry. I don't think those are necessarily needed on this. Business parcels will, by the time they get everything they need in there, it's going to be that wide. When we start to look at minimum lot area, we did do a 1/4 acre. Right now it varies. It's a maximum of a 1/2 acre or a 1/4 acre if it's adjacent to a residential district. We're going to limit the scale of this in other ways than lot size. If they want to be on a little bit bigger lot, they're still not getting a bigger building based on the standards here. So that just gives you a little more buffer between you and the neighbor then. So we did look at a front yard setback of 20. Right now, it's not stated, so I would have to interpret it with that one sentence, and there that says no structure should be closer than 10 feet from a front property line or from a right-of-way line. And the same thing on your side and rear, those are really not stated, so we've gone with 15 and 15, so on front and rear for your primary. I think that's very reasonable. Structure height, that is one, again, you did have a structure height specified, so we left 30 feet there. But the way we're really controlling the scale is through the ground floor area. So that 10,000 square foot, so a footprint of a building can't be more than 10,000 square feet. That makes it smaller. That makes it a smaller scale. It's not going to be this giant thing. Questions on that one? Okay. All right, so in general business, this one was very interesting because your general business district is like, we're just going to figure it out when it comes to plan commission. Like, that's literally what it says. It's all like, to be determined by the planning commission. That's not a good practice. That's not being able to like apply things equally and consistently across the board. So we actually set some standards for these. So again, lot width and lot area, I'm not ever really concerned about. When we start to get to business districts, they take care of themselves. But we did do some setbacks. So 40 feet on the front, 20 on the side and rear, and then a 50-foot structure height. So this is your bigger things. This is like the Walmart. This is the, the grocery store. This is the bigger things, right? The strip malls, that sort of thing. That's what this district's going to be. Okay. All right, CBD's our next one. So again, a lot of your standards, we tried to somewhat match those, but we don't need a minimum lot width or area because it's downtown. We specified it needs to be placed on the property line, the front setback, so it's a 0 minimum maximum. We're telling you where to put it. That matches more of your historic district guidelines. Right now it just doesn't say in your ordinance. And then we did do, currently, it says it's a 3-foot setback. So like all your buildings on Main Street have to have a 3-foot side yard setback, not a common wall. That doesn't make sense. So we went with 0. The rear, though, we did say is 3 foot rear if you have a public alley, and the purpose of that is like trash trucks or anything else that's going down there, they're going to hit you. So we want them off the alley a little bit. And then 45 foot height, which mirrors your current and mirrors your historic district. Okay. So aviation business, this is the new one. So there's nothing on the little red text to put on the side here. Again, the purpose of this one is just the airport parcels, just the parcels owned by the airport. And FAA has their own thoughts on things. My favorite variance I ever had to get was for a large parcel distribution that they were required to put sidewalks next to the runway. Not gonna happen, you know? I mean, it just doesn't make sense, right? Because that's what the zoning ordinance said, but obviously FAA has something else to say about that. I mean, and it was a give me. Okay, yeah, I understand that, but we had to go through the process. So we're looking at 40 foot front yard setback, 20 rear and side, and then the height is 40 foot unless it's required for aviation, for like FAA. So, you know, if you ever had, you know, a tower out there or something of that nature, if FAA is going to make us do something, then obviously we're going to do that. So we kind of left that a little bit. Again, it just helps them to be able to kind of navigate their requirements. They're going through a lot more approvals than local approvals, so. And then our I-1, so we left the 10,000 square foot minimum lot size. Again, it's unclear on your setbacks. There's no setbacks stated for these, which is a little scary. So we went with 50 for front yard. I think that's a very good standard average, and 25 side and rear. And then we went with a 50 foot height. It was only 5 feet more than what it is currently, but just to kind of match the other districts we did. Okay. And then your I-2, that is currently your minimum lot area is only 10,000 square feet, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. So we did up that. This is heavy industry. This isn't just like the light stuff. And then again, your setbacks are unclear. So we've specified 75 for front and 50 for side and rears. And then upped a little bit on the height as well, because sometimes they do need that. Okay. Alright, so PUD is our last actual district. This is always a fun one. I don't think you have any PUDs today. Okay, so PUDs, there's a love-hate with those, right? The essence of a PUD is very, very good. The intention of that is for something that is just so unique, right, that doesn't fit any of our zoning districts, right? It's for one of those things that you have this great idea of like mixed uses and different things happening that we need to write our own rules. A PUD, though, is basically its own zoning district. So remember that when it comes to you guys. It's a rezoning, but it's rezoning and they're making their own zoning district. So they make all of their rules for the zoning district, not subdivision, though. Make sure that's clear. In our ordinance now, though, your current ordinance is kind of like very not descriptive of what it is. We are much more descriptive. We are going to make them, they have to specify all of their lot and structure standards. Those little tables we went through, they have to fill it out. One of my pet peeves is that in Indiana, you can do a PUD by a development plan, that little site plan, that plat-looking thing they give you, and that's all they put in there. That's it, right? And you're like, well, you told me a front setback, but like, what are my side? What's my rear? What are my uses? What are my building height? What's all the other rules? You told me like one rule, right? So we would make them fill out this little chart here, and we would also make them tell us what are the permitted land uses. Is it just single family residential? Is it something else? We also make them specify all these use standards that are in our ordinance. If they're gonna not apply, we need to know. If not, guess what? We're saying they apply. And then same thing with our site standards. So that's another one. Again, PUD makes its own zoning rules, but they won't ever talk to you about signs or about, or not a lot of times, signs or parking or any of those things. We're making them say, tell me what the rules are, and if you don't, then we're going to use our rules, right? Our adopted rules. So that's kind of what your PUD is, but they shouldn't be used to circumvent your zoning districts. You shouldn't be used because it's like, oh, well, I just don't want to go get a variance for this or a waiver, and I'm just going to like, finagle it and make this happen. It really should be a unique kind of thing. Questions on that one? Because I know that's a different, yes?
Could you give us an example of what?
A good PUD? I'll give you an example with a caveat of like the fanciness. Don't take that. Norton Commons, right? Because a lot of people here are familiar with that. That's great. Like you have this little core center of like retail and living and working happening, and then it organically comes to like townhomes and small lots, and then to bigger lots, right? So that's a good example because it's different. But if you had something where you wanted to integrate a halfway decent one too, if anybody's familiar with Hawthorne Glen, and I'll explain why I'll say this is halfway decent. It's like near Sellersburg, if you off 403, if anybody's familiar. The reason I say it's halfway decent is because they have single family homes, but they also integrate it's independent living still. But they're almost like either 2 or 4 plexes, but there's a nurse's station, and it's all developmentally challenged adults. So they get integrated in, they use the same pool house, and it's in the neighborhood, but that's not single family, right? That's all one lot. If you drive through that section, it's all 1 or 2 lots, right, owned by Roush. And then they were going to have better retail at the corner. Now it's a Dollar General, or a dollar something. So the idea, they wanted to mix those things into the same subdivision, and you would have had to rezone this, and this, R1 and this R3 or something. So that would be a decent, again, something that it's combining uses that just aren't permitted under the current ordinance. Yeah, new urbanism, that's for sure. Yeah, if you want to have like these, again, that kind of idea, you have some sort of core density of housing and retail or something, and then it transitions out, right? That's a good, because you'd have to either zone everything really dense, which might be a little scary to the community, or you'd have to like parcel these things out before it's parceled out. So that makes sense. Not when they come in with just single family houses because they don't want to follow the zoning rules. That's not good use. Because then that's hard to administer, because I've just now got another zoning district I got to know the regs for. So our overlays, I'm not going to touch on these too much, but again, this is just going to mirror the DNR maps, right? And as the DNR maps are updated, this automatically just mirrors that, because even if we don't, they are going to tell us we have to. Your historic overlay, I didn't throw the map on this one because it's not in your GIS system, but it's the same thing. We're not changing that district. Like it's just taking the district, we're mirroring it. It mirrors your other ordinance that is adopted. The airport overlay is one that's a little different. So it's the airport and also your heliport helipad out at the new hospital. So those are 2 that we need. Again, whether we regulate some of this or not, it's going to happen. So it also provides for review by the Madison Airport to eliminate some of those issues where development might happen, and they're like, oh, you built something, guess what, it's too big, it's in my flight path, So it helps to reduce conflicts. We don't want people spending money doing things to then have to undo them. So it has 2 subzones. The first is a height limit zone. So the one on your left is the airport, and you'll notice like there's this odd like straight line. That's because that's the end of your jurisdiction and the beginning of the county's. The county is something similar, so it continues, just not in your jurisdiction. This is the area that basically, again, we've worked with the airport on this, and they've reviewed it, and they're good. We've made some tweaks with them, some good things. When you really look at the FAA's flight, there's multiple 3-dimensional cones coming out from your airport, right? It takes a lot of thought process, brain power, engineer, somebody else to figure out when it talks about, well, this approach zone goes out at a 1:40 angle for this many 10,000 feet, and then after 10,000 feet it goes at this type of slope for another 40,000 feet, and then on this side, it gets a lot. So what we've done is we've simplified it. We've said the max height in any district is 60 feet, right? So you can't be above 60 feet here anyway, unless you're a cell tower. That's another world. Cell towers know the rules. We've already taken care of them. So 60 feet is our limit. So all we really care about is where can you be 60 feet within those zones, right? Within those slopes. Well, this is about it. It's about 6,000 feet ish. So we've just gone out and simplified it again. Gone out from the boundaries of the airport rather than the runway too, at the end of the runway. Again, that allows them to expand. If they're going to expand the runway on those parcels, we're good. All it is it's a red flag. So all it says is if you're in this zone, go talk to the airport, talk to FAA and DOT, and if they're good, we're good. It's just making sure nobody builds something and then has to tear it down. So the other one is the heliport helipad. Again, we've just used the parcel boundaries for simplicity here. It's still governed by FAA. And that's much smaller. That's, I think, 2,500 feet, because helicopters they can go up and down a lot easier than airplanes. So questions on those? I want to make sure you guys understood what those are. We're not putting additional regs like in that aspect. FAA is going to come do their thing anyway. So the noise is the other one. We don't have that around the helipad because they're not quite as loud or as probably frequent as the airport. So again, the intention by FAA, NDOT is what this is like. You don't build next to the airport and then you're like, oh, those airplanes are so loud. They were there first, so it's more of an acknowledgement. It doesn't mean you can't build. This means that the NDOT process is basically you have to get a noise sensitive permit. You record something through your deed that says, I understand there's planes and they're loud and I'm building next to it voluntarily. So I can't complain. The one thing we did with this is, NDOT, FAA, they regulate it 1,500 feet on the side of a runway and 1 nautical mile on the ends of a runway, right? So I'm try to I'm gonna point real quick. So this would be the side of your runway, and that would be the end of your runway, just to orient you in case because there's not an aerial under that. So we did go 1 nautical mile down from the end of the property line, because it's just easier. And then on the side, instead of going 1,500 feet, we did work with the airport and went 3,000 feet. And the intention is, again, not to prevent development from happening, but it's to just have those folks acknowledge that they might be loud, right? So 1,500 feet, they have to get a permit from NDOT. Between the 1,500 and 3,000 feet, they don't have to get a permit from NDOT. All that we're asking them to do is record something with their deed saying, I understand I'm next to an airport and it might be loud. So not preventing it, just making sure. Really also, it's when the next person buys that house, it's hopefully another place they find that, right? They are aware of it. Okay, questions on that? Okay, told you this is the chapter we're going to spend the most time on. So also within this then, we have our permitted land use tables here and a section for that. I'm going to go over the legend first because it's different than what you currently have. I want to make sure we understand that. Currently you have X's, which mean permitted. When I first picked up your ordinance, I thought that meant prohibited because that would be more common. X means like, do not go, do not pass. So we're updating this to just kind of be a little bit more standard. So where you see a P under the zoning districts, these first chunk of, mine's upside down, sorry. These first chunk of columns, that means it's permitted by right. So you can do that, right? You still have to get a building permit and things like that, but the use doesn't have to be approved. P/S or -S, that means it's permitted by right, but Chapter 3 has some additional standards for you to follow. You still have to follow them. It's still permitted by right though, right? But if you are sexually oriented businesses coming to mind because we definitely have standards on that, if you're one of those uses, you still have to follow standards, but you're permitted by right. That one would not be. That would be a conditional use. And then A means it's permitted as an accessory use, right? So that means it's not the primary use, it's something else. But by right, so we don't have to have approvals. And to remind you guys, we're regulating parcels, right? We don't regulate what's within the right of way. So we don't regulate like a bus stop or things like that. Not that you got a trolley stop. That's not it. We regulate parcels. Within the right of way is regulated by Board of Works and other entities in the city. So then we also then have special exceptions. So you guys currently call these conditional uses. Down here in the southern area, we definitely like to get things mixed up between us and other side of the river. So we'll go through a couple of these too when we get to the processes. But conditional use, you can call them conditional uses. Most Indiana communities, vast majority call them special exceptions. That's how it's outlined more frequently in state statute. Conditional use is a Kentucky term. When we get to the processes, conditional use permit is 100% a Kentucky thing, not an Indiana statute thing. So we're going to talk about that too. That's in Kentucky, that's a whole different process. You have to do that annually until it's permanently fulfilled, and I don't like to do those things. So that's not an Indiana thing. Same thing with some of our terms with plats. It's not a final plat in Indiana, it's a secondary plat in Indiana. Kentucky calls them final plats. So S just means it's permitted by special exception, which is what you guys currently call conditional uses, right? So it requires that public hearing, public notice, public input, and approval by BZA. S-S means it's still a special exception, right? But we have those standards, right? So I don't care if you still have to go to BZA and get it approved. we still setting your baseline, right? And any special exception can have additional conditions put on it by BZA. So even if something comes in and it's a whole, very unique thing, and they need to put other standards on it, BZA can do that. And then finally, if it's blank, it's prohibited, right? And then the unique thing too is we have our overlay districts, these little 3 on the side here. This, when you work through our districts, your use is regulated by your base district, right? The only thing that we do put a little extra on is we then prohibit things in the overlay districts, right? So if you are, use general business, right, in the historic district, something might be appropriate in general business, but maybe not in the historic district, right? So we would then prohibit it. So X is over here, and the little key, it printed out a little funny on your handouts. It looks correct in the PDF. X's just mean it doesn't matter if it's allowed in the base district, like your zoning district. If it's X'd out, you can't do it in that overlay. So the only things we really look at are floodplain. There are things that shouldn't be in a floodplain, right? Confined feeding, right? We don't put confined feeding in a floodplain. That's all going to go down the river. In the historic district, there's just some things like we probably don't want, I'll pick the first one I see, correctional institution in the historic district, right? It might be permitted in a base district, we don't want it there. And then the airport overlay, the things we try to prevent in that are things that are really high density people-wise. And this is like in that FAA guidance. Unfortunately, we just experienced some of that if you have a plane not make the runway or crash, and it's an apartment complex or a nursing home or a hospital, that's a really big deal. Warehouses, hopefully we have less injuries and fatalities and casualties. So that's the goal of prohibiting things in the airport overlay, as well as things that attract a lot of birds, geese especially, because those don't mix with airplanes. So that's the reason we have things prohibited in that airport overlay. So I printed these out for you guys, so you can, because that's one I know everybody usually wants to look at in detail. I'm not going to go through them all here unless you have a question for them, but I want to go through a couple of uses at least. We do have them categorized by like type of use. So ag uses go first, and again you see like the A's and the P's and the S's. We also then go into commercial uses. So one thing I was going to point out is general retail. So one thing in your current ordinance, it's a modified version of like a use classification system that has way more uses. But it gets into things like, I think yours had like women's shoes but not men's. Okay, well, you can sell women's shoes but not men's, sorry. It's just some of those get very dated, right? And so, or shoe repair, but you can't sell the shoe. So what we try to do is modernize your uses. So general retail, and these are all definitions in that last chapter. General retail, I wanted to explain what that was. If you think of general retail, it's I'm going to buy something. I'm going to go buy this pen, right? I'm taking something with me and I'm going to buy it. So the examples are department stores, superstores, retail, supermarkets, groceries, drugstores, and there's some caveats with medical things with that. Discount stores, that sort of thing. Josh, you got this one?
Yes, so, was it on?
It was on.
Test. There we go. One of the things that's come up in the past with our current ordinance is that the names of the land uses don't always have clear common definitions, and there's no clear guidance within the ordinance for where those definitions should come from.
Yes. So we have lots of definitions of those in there. So if you look through this list and then go to our definitions, I'm not going to say 100% of them, like liquor store is not defined. We also in our definitions state that if there is not a definition, it is using the most current version of Merriam-Webster dictionary. That's what we define it as then. Liquor store is probably not something, but right below it, medical offices and outpatient, that's defined. And it specifies exactly what that is. Again, professional office businesses is defined, restaurant is defined, rural event venue, service-oriented retail. We define the vast majority of these uses in the definitions.
And is Merriam-Webster's dictionary the best source of the...
That's the most common. I would tend to use that. If there is also a question on that, again, that can be interpreted. Your administrator has the ability to interpret these things. I don't like interpreting that. I like
Yeah.
black and white. I've not run into issues with that before.
Are there any national zoning organizations that publish definitions?
Not that stay consistent
Not-
for years and years.
Okay.
That's when Merriam-Webster, it's not going away. You know what I mean? It's a consistent source we know is going to be there for the next 20 years, I would think, you know? So I think that continuity is important in my mind too.
Okay.
So if you go through there, Josh, and you don't see a definition you want it, just mark it and I will make sure you have a definition for it.
Yep.
So, okay. So the other one I was going to point out is service-oriented retail. That is when I'm getting a service, right? So I'm going to go to a yoga studio. They're giving me a service. I'm not coming out purchasing like an actual thing, like a pin. So those are things like instructional services. Could be the ballet, studio. It also includes food establishments and restaurants, because I might be leading with something, but it's in my stomach, or it will be in my stomach soon. Marinas and docking areas for boats, pleasure craft, that was specifically added because this is a unique thing to you guys. Service and repair services, and personal services like banks, that sort of thing. And those are more elaborated in your definitions. I didn't want to take up the entire page, one slide on that, so I took off all the such as's, but those are expanded upon in your definitions. So are there questions? We also go through industrial, and then we have residential, and then institutional uses. So again, when you look at those, if it's an X in the overlays, that just means it's prohibited, right? Regardless of what happens in your zoning district, it's prohibited. So when you start to look at some of those, hopefully that makes sense. Yes? I can.
We use the mic, I can't hear what Tony's saying.
Yeah, okay. He wanted to know, Tony wanted to know, I'll repeat it for you. If I could talk about wireless communication facilities, cell towers basically. So cell towers, yes, if they're within the right of way, we have very little ability to regulate those. Right now that's really more of like your mini towers. We have more ability in your historic district through your design and board review, your design guidelines on that. Like you can make them look like a light pole. And the historic board of review could do that. We really are regulating them within a parcel itself. So when you start to look at those, it's on the bottom of the last page of your handout. We basically make them special exceptions in every district except for the riverfront district. And the only reason I didn't do that is because it wasn't in the one you guys passed, and I didn't want to touch that. So I'll let that alone. So it's special exception, and basically it's going to have to come through, BZA to get approved. We can't regulate some things with them now. We can't regulate their setbacks other than the fall zone determined by a professional engineer. So they tell us how it's going to, if it falls over, it's going to fall X feet. And we can't regulate height of those anymore. So that's state statute changes in the last handful of years. But we can regulate them as a use on the private parcels. And we have a whole use standard I'm not going to go through tonight because it basically mirrors state statute on that. Okay, good question. Any others on that one? Okay. That was the longest one. That was the one I wanted to make sure I got in most depth with you guys on, so bear with me. So I'm going to go through some of these, and I'm going to pick out highlights from some of these chapters that I thought maybe you guys would want to know more about. So our third chapter talks about certain standards for certain uses. We have things like accessory dwelling units. That's like your mother-in-law suite. I'm going to go through that one in a minute. Battery energy storage, campgrounds, home-based business, home occupations, junkyards, salvage yards, long-term care facilities. It's like a nursing home. Manufactured home park. Talked about that one again. It's a special exception, but it also has certain standards. Recovery residences. That's like transitional houses, that sort of thing. Sexually oriented businesses. You guys have independent ordinances on that, so we're really referencing those. Short-term rentals. Those are like Airbnbs, VRBOs. And then the others are solar energy systems, accessory, which is just like it's on my roof on my house, or commercial, which is what you guys all know. Utility facility, again, some of our ability to regulate the utility facilities that are public ones through the IURC is more limited. But other vehicle equipment and repair service, wind energy, which isn't going to probably be a big use here because of where you guys are. And then wireless communication facilities, cell towers, as was just mentioned. So the ones I'm going to run through are the ones I just highlighted in orange here. So ADUs, battery energy, home-based business, manufactured home park, and short-term rental. I just wanted to run through these to give you like an orientation to them. The others I'm not going to run through just because I have really time, but definitely read through those. I'll give you a couple little heads up. Home occupation is basically work from home. Have at it. You'll see it's permitted everywhere as long as you meet our standards. The reason we have standards is so that it is work from home and not running a business, right? It basically is no customers, no employees. You look like a duck, walk like a duck, you are a duck, right? Have fun working from home, we like that. The other sexually oriented businesses that really, again, you have independent ordinances on that, and we're basically referencing those. Solar, so we largely did mirror the county standards on that with some exceptions. So some of those setbacks are a little less here. Some of your sureties are, again, just switched up and kind of changed a little bit, but we largely tried to mirror or follow a lot of the standards from the county's newer solar ordinances that were just done. I will point out too that is a special exception in ag and I-2. So you don't have a lot of ag parcels right now in your buffer. Vast majority of those are residential, RA. So it would require a rezone and a special exception to processes currently, if it's in the buffer area. So there's for those assurances there. Okay, so I'm going to run through these. An ADU, so that is your mother-in-law suite. I just pulled 2 pictures from the internet. A lot of times it's like the detached garage conversion. So again, some of these are great. We want to make sure that we're really regulating some of these though. So it's only permitted with these standards in R3 right now and CBD, because CBD is a lot of density anyway. Otherwise, it's a special exception with their standards in ag, RA, R1, and R2. And HDR, sorry, it's permitted with standards in HDR. So the idea is it could fit, it might not fit, right? So we need to kind of look through that. So when we look at these standards, again, it's a separate access. This is not, it's detached. This is, if it's attached, I call it a duplex. It's detached from your primary, and it has all the provisions for living, right? It's not just like a shed. I'll also point out though that if a structure has provision areas for sleeping, cooking, bathroom, aka a really fancy pool house, we are going to consider that an ADU unless they sign a use affidavit that gets recorded saying, I am not living in this area. And that just helps with enforcement, right? I understand you might want to have a barn or a pool house that has, a bathroom, a sink, and a little later, area you in theory could live in. If they sign that use affidavit, then that helps us with enforcement. It's easy to be like, oh, no, look, you said you weren't going to do this, and you're doing it. I can very clearly enforce you now. So that's just an easier way to deal with those and not have issues. But some of the quick standards on this, again, you'll kind of go through these. The one thing I wanted to point out was minimum setbacks. So it is an accessory structure, but we're making them comply with the primary structure setbacks because, it has some activity going on. Do you want to do that? You want to do it now, or are you going to go through the standards first? Which one, Josh?
Just on the living thing, what is the difference between living and using like a pool house? It requires sleeping?
Yes, you're
Okay.
sleeping in it. Yep. Yeah, pool house, you want to go shower in there, hang out, have your little cookout. You can have someone sleeping in there. Now, granted, if your kids sleep there for a sleepover, nobody's probably going to notice, right? But grandma shouldn't be living there, or your child shouldn't be living there after they graduate without being approved. So also the location is, it has to be in a rear yard. It can't be in a side or front yard. And then some of the other quick little structure standards, I'm just kind of pointing out some of the highlights. One of the big things here is because we're allowing some by permitted or special exceptional standards, we're putting some good standards on there, I think. They have to be at least 300 square feet, but they can't be bigger than 800 square feet or half of the footprint of your primary dwelling, right? The intention is not that I have a 2,000 square foot house and then I'm going to have a 2,000 square foot accessory dwelling. The intent is if my footprint of my house is 2,000 square feet, I only get 800 square feet, right? If my footprint of my house is 1,000 square feet, I can only make it 500 square feet. It's accessory. It should be smaller. It shouldn't be big and giant, right? So, and that's the living area. And then the other thing I was going to point out, types of structures. Again, it has to be illegal. It has to meet building code for a dwelling. You can't just like stick the mother-in-law in the barn. That is not intended for dwelling. It's not the building code. It cannot be within an RV or anything of an RV sort. And it has to be, again, it has to be something for permanent human occupancy. Building code here. So, questions on that? Okay. All right. Battery energy storage system, BESS.
Well, I do have a question.
Yeah.
If I could use my,
Yeah, of course, Mayor.
we could go, right here. All right, I'm live. The last bullet point, may be used as a rental unit, but is not considered a short-term
Yes.
rental. So
Good
you
comment.
can't use an ADU as an Airbnb, for example. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So that's a good one, and I
Okay.
tried to put it on the screen so you'd remind me if I didn't. So like if I have an ADU in my backyard, right, and it's approved, I can rent it to I can rent it to Tony to live in, right? But I cannot use that as an Airbnb. So the difference is I am not using it for short-term rental, and we have a definition for that. I believe it's 7 days, no more than 30. But if I'm going to rent it to him for 12 months, that's fine. Or I can let my mother-in-law live in there for free, or I could charge her. They can have rental. It does not have to be a family member, basically. I want to make sure everybody's usually aware of that. That is way too hard to regulate. But it cannot be a short-term rental. Now, if you also go through and get it approved as a short-term rental, that's another story. But it just, because you have an ADU does not mean I'm going to Airbnb this thing out. ADU is not a short-term rental. If you go get it approved as a short-term rental, that could be a different.
So you're saying you'd have to come in and maybe get a special exception?
Twice then. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you come in, you're like, I want a special exception for my ADU and a short-term rental, because I don't know if my mother's going to live in it, or if I'm going to rent this thing out on the weekends for, all the fun festivals. Cool. Good comment. Okay, so battery. This is considered a separate use from wind or solar. So this is not, if it is included with one of those, we say in our ordinance that you have to get approval for both uses. And basically it's one or more devices that store energy, right? More or less. We have 2 tiers of these though. So tier 1 is typically on-site backup, right? So if you have a generator at your house, you have a BESS. If you're a business that has a backup generator or backup, power, the hospital, that is a BESS technically. We define those as 600 kilowatts or less. That's kind of more of a, again, aligning with industry standards. Indiana code aligns them a little bit differently, but this helps us to be a little bit more stringent on these. We are not as concerned about that generator at your house or the generator at the hospital or at Walmart, right? Those things are not what we're concerned about. That's this picture here. It's like a box somewhere, it sits on a pad. It looks like your utility box. That's not a big deal. They all have to meet state building codes, so we're not worried about that either. There's lots of codes on these. It's the bigger ones that we're more worried about. So tier 2 is typically used either for some sort of utility function. Substations actually have these sometimes as well, to help to store to meet peak loads. And those are the ones greater than 600 kilowatts, which aka they're the big ones, right? They're the big containers that you're going to see out on a site. So yeah, they all again have to. There are multiple national and state codes, regulations regulating safety of those, so they have to meet all of those regardless. But we're going to regulate them as a use. So that's the reason I threw this one in, because it's a different use you guys probably haven't discussed before. Versus some like solar, you have discussed that and have had some discussions, so you can read through those regs. But we do outline, again, additional standards for emergency response, for noise or vibration. We have additional lot standards for them. And the one I was going to point out too is minimum setbacks. So again, I don't care what district you're in, you're going to have to at least be 50 foot from a right-of-way, 350 feet from a dwelling or existing community building, 200 feet from an adjacent property line. So we're not as much concerned if you're next to my right-of-way, but my neighbors, we want more space, right? And if there's more than one parcel that's all BESS, we don't really care about that setback. We also do have some screening requirements. Again, they're big boxes, right? So they're big like container boxes on a concrete pad. It's not as obtrusive as maybe like you go up north, right, and you like see the wind turbines. See them at night. It looks really kind of cool and freaky. So we do have some screening regulations we did put on these as well. And again, tried to mirror some of our solar things in here too, so we're kind of treating these somewhat similar. Some other things I was going to point out, we also do require decommissioning for these. So again, this isn't probably as big of a thing to decommission maybe sometimes as like those wind turbines or solar fields, because they're very large. These are usually concentrated. They're not nearly as many acres. But we do want to make sure we do that. And they have to resubmit that every 5 years, or if that owner operator changes. And if basically they're not used for 12 consecutive months, you got to start decommissioning them. So we do have a lot of our standards in here. I'm not going to go through all of those just because of time, but a lot of these again are mirrored into our solar and wind as well.
On these
Yeah.
setbacks, does that apply to both internal, or I guess, battery systems that are inside of another structure as well as exterior?
Those are just property line setbacks.
So the
your
building would,
your building code is going to depict the others, like how you think separation between them.
well, I guess I'm looking at 200 feet and 350 feet. Those are really big setbacks.
Those are big from just the property owners, and those sometimes, again, not an expert in those necessarily, but they can hum more than other energy uses like solar or something of that nature. They do have a little bit more of a hum to them.
So I guess is that standard for that distance, or is that
So
very
again,
large? Or?
there's probably less like industry standards on this versus solar and wind at the moment because it's come along after those uses. But these are based on some of the best practices from like APA, National American Planning Association, other organizations, paired with trying to also partner it or pair it with your solar regulations and wind. So trying to kind of come to a marrying point between those. A lot of times if this is paired with like a solar use, they're going to usually put this on the internal of that anyway. So where you might get them is sometimes a substation. But like I know regionally Duke was looking at doing one because it was not related to any of the wind or solar. It was just an independent one to have peak loads. So when we start to have peak load issues, that helps to offset it. Because they basically store energy at night when nobody's using energy, and then they can offload it during the day when everybody wants to use the energy.
Okay. And then going back to the ADUs, sorry.
You good?
On the permitted uses, so HDR, CBD, and R3, they're permitted to have the ADUs, but you have the additional standards apply.
Yes.
But R1 and R2, they require the special exception.
Correct.
What's the
Deal.
reason?
Why? It's more of a density type of thing. So HDR, when you think about it, that's pretty dense district, right? R3, we allow multifamily. So if you have a single family house and an ADU, probably not a big deal because you would be allowed to do an apartment. When you get to R1 and R2, those are more of like your normal subdivisions, normal housing areas, where we just need to make sure it's not going to impact your neighbors. So it's just one layer of consideration that really needs to probably be paid. Because there's some areas that would be appropriate, and there's probably some areas that would not be appropriate in that district. Okay, cool, good questions. Okay, home-based businesses is one. Again, work from home is our home occupation, and the reason we have standards is so we can say you're not working from home, you're running a business. Home-based business is kind of that next level, right? I'm kind of running a little bit of something happening out of here, right? It might be like your one stall hairdresser who just does like 4 or 5 people a day. It could be your CPA, right, who doesn't have an office, but like she might have a client come over, meet, and then leave, or have like an employee during tax season or something like that come over. So in my mind, when I kind of say home-based business, you might just think they have a couple friends over. That should be the limit, right? So that's the level of intensity where this really should be. And right now, home-based businesses, so they'd be permitted with standards in ag and also in general business and CBD, because, well, there's a lot of other things happening in those business districts. But it's special exception, special exception standards in RA, R1, R2, R3, and HDR. So it's just trying to make sure there's not an impact, right, on So it has to be entirely within your building or a structure. Can't include a short-term rental or childcare. Childcare is a separate use in the use table. So some things just to point out, we do a maximum of employees and customers. So you can't have max of 6 employees per day, but no more than 2 at a time, right? So it's myself or whoever. I don't know if my husband also works for the business. If you work there, if you live there, you can hang out all day long. But I can only have 2 employees come over at a time, max of 6 per day. That's so it's not like a revolving door. And similar with customers, 10 per day, but no more than 2 at a time. So we just don't want a whole bunch of people coming in at once, right? And making it entirely within a building is our car repair, car detailing, right? Not doing it in our driveway and have a bunch of cars lined up. I don't want to see it. If I don't see it, and I don't see people coming and going other than what looks like kind of company, that's probably not a big deal.
So on that,
Yeah.
the 2 employees, does that include the owner?
No, so it says excluding residents of the property. So
Okay.
anyone who lives there, they would be there anyway.
And then-
So it's external people.
For the entirely enclosed within a building thing, I guess some small business may be, I don't know, art-based, or like somebody does, I don't know, log carving. I'm trying to think of something that would be in their backyard maybe instead of inside the building. Is that, would that be
well,
restricted in the?
that's the next one. Oh, I got one.
Did I jump
Did it
ahead?
highlight? Okay, I can't. From this side, I can't see the highlights because it's washed out. But the outdoor storage. So that's yeah. So when you start to look at it, yes, it does need to be incidental. Outdoor display of products and goods is prohibited, so I can't put like my wood carving out front or my art out front. All outdoor storage areas used to park equipment have to be behind the primary building, like so behind your house, basically in your rear, and they need to be either within a fully enclosed structure or have a solid fence. So I need to screen it. While you might love your art or your wood carving, the neighbor might not love the big piles of wood or whatever it may be. So we want to make sure it's just screened.
I guess I was looking more at that location one where if they wanted to do it in their backyard where it is screened from fences, is that reasonable? And that would not be permitted by this,
Right,
right?
it's going to be within the accessory structure.
They have to
Again,
be
the
inside.
intent here is it should still really be a house. We're not talking about like a business, right? Where you're having art shows, or you go to like, you know, Gatlinburg and they have the wood carvings all outside their houses. That's a business. This is intended to allow for some flexibility for businesses to happen in your house, but it really still looks like a house. I shouldn't drive by and think it's a business, if that makes sense. If not, then you are a business, and let's go through a business. You know what I mean? That's the intent.
I was just thinking maybe there should be the incidental allowance, should that be in the
Should be-
location,
or should we maybe allow it just within
like in the backyard?
screened, if it's
Just
really
screened or
okay,
something. Maybe
okay.
there's-
I'm gonna make a note of that.
Because I can think of a lot of those home businesses where somebody's building something small. They're doing a small volume, but they need to take it outside and paint it. And
Yeah,
something
and if
like
you
that.
paint it outside, you're probably not gonna, no, if you're painting it every single day
yeah.
and spraying it, that gets to be a little bit more.
Maybe there's some reasonable language we could put there.
I can
just
do
to-
something, maybe it's again this fully screened idea.
Yeah.
Good thoughts, Josh. Okay, we're getting through these here, because I know we're got about 25 minutes left, but manufactured home park, this is what I just want you guys to look at. These standards apply only to manufactured home parks, right? So the park is when there's more than one on one parcel. This does not apply to a single manufactured home on a single residential lot. That is a big change from your current, and that's a state statute change. That is not an us change. That is not a anybody here sitting in this room's decision change. That's a state statute change. We cannot, we can no longer regulate manufactured mobile homes as a use. We have to, on a single lot, we have to treat them the same that we would treat stick-built home. So that is a big change from your current use, and that is a state statute thing, so we don't have the ability to change that. So on R1, R2, anywhere we permit a single-family dwelling, a manufactured home is permitted as a structure. We can regulate parks still. We have some things we can slightly regulate, and that's why we have some minimum square footages in some of our districts, and some of those things. And we have a few minor standards on those single lot homes that are allowed by state statute. So these, I'm gonna flip through these kind of fast, but these are really intended for you guys to look through. It's for the parks. We do have some operational standards. We have some additional lot standards. Really, that again, each one has to be at least an acre for the whole thing, and 3,000 square feet per home site, no more than 8 homes per acre. Some of that's based on your current stuff as well. Just kind of translated into this. And we do, one big thing is though, we do require site access. So those internal roads remain private, but they're going to function like roads. We want them to build them to our public road standards, and we are going to have sidewalks required within that, so people can actually walk around that subdivision as well. Prohibited types of structures, just to point out, this is not RVs, this is not travel trailers. It can't be like do you even write boat or similar vessel? Because again, being a river town, we have different thoughts and processes here, right? You can't live in your boat, you dry docked. There, sorry, that is not a manufactured home. So definitely want you guys to look through those, but again, these are the parks, so I want to make sure that's a distinction, not an individual lot. Short-term rentals, these are Airbnbs. Again, this is defined largely by state statute now, and we will require an annual registration permit, and that's pretty much regulated by state statute if you're going to do it too. So this is one of my fun ones. Airbnb or VRBO, one of the two, that rented out Barbie's Dream House when that movie was really big. So book a night at Barbie's Dream House. You know, that was kind of one of their funny joke promotions. But we do have some standards on those. It's permitted and prohibited types of structures is something to look at. It is basically going to be in a dwelling, right? Whether it's single family, apartment, condo, it's in a dwelling. It is not in an RV stuck in the backyard. It is not in a boat stuck in the backyard. So again, it's in an actual dwelling. And that's a big distinction. Questions on those as I ran through some of those standards? Okay. I'm going to keep us moving here. But our site standards, these are the things that are outlined in that chapter in terms of site standards. And, oops, somehow I flipped all off. I'm going to walk through just some of these in pieces and parts of some of these. So outdoor storage is one I'm going to run through. Parking, we're going to kind of touch high level. Screening and buffer yards, I want to explain that because that's how we're kind of attacking previously in your current ordinance, like, you know, you've got 8,000 things outlined in each district of, like, if it's this use, then it's going to be this setback. If it's this use, it's this setback. If it's next to residential, it's this setback. We're attacking that with our buffers.
Amy, I got a quick question.
Yeah, of course.
I know you moved on to site standards.
Yes.
But back on the use standards,
Okay.
you know, we didn't talk about solar or wind.
We did not. So I will.
And I
can
know
touch
that's
on
an
those
important
really
topic,
quickly.
and maybe you could just touch on it.
Yeah.
Second.
Let me touch on some of that. I'm going to turn to that page.
Thank you.
So, solar, again, we use the county's new ordinance as a base so that we can hopefully kind of jive with them. There are some differences. One of the bigger differences is the setbacks. And so that was reduced. I'm trying to flip to my right page here, sorry. Commercial SES. Setbacks here, road use. So in terms of, I'll run through a couple of those, like the emergency response and the road use agreements and damage to public roads, that again, we've pulled from the county's kind of standards here. The insurances are similar to theirs. They're not quite as high as the county's. Minimum setbacks, that is on page 74 whenever you do get to looking into that. Those are less than the county standards, and that was a big, long debate in the counties. But we're looking at, it's 350 setback from a dwelling, church, school, cemetery, or community building. I believe, I'm going to do this off the cuff, Warren, you might correct me. Is it 650 in the county for a setback? 500, okay. So we're a little bit less. 200 feet from other lane uses that are non-participating. So those got reduced a little bit, but not significantly slashed or anything like that. And that was just trying to kind of, again, marry some of what input we got from the committee. It's still a pretty good setback. One thing too is you're gonna have 2 points pretty much in the city's area that you're gonna have to go through. You're gonna have to go through a rezoning, which allows some discretion and allows written commitments to be put in place for certain houses or properties that need more buffer. And then they're gonna go through a special exception, which allows for the same thing. If there's a certain situation that needs more buffer or more screening, that allows for a written commitment or a condition to be placed on that approval for a certain condition, right, or a certain situation. So that is somewhere that does vary a little bit. But like the screening, I tried to mirror that in terms of like even the fence specs and that sort of thing in there. so the biggest difference is, again, the setbacks and a little bit of the, there's some other things in here, but some of the insurance requirements as well, and sureties. But we still require them to do a decommissioning plan. And I do have a strike change, like a track changes from the counties. This one, if anybody wants to see that, like when we went through and I kind of did that. But we still require them to do an affidavit of responsibility and a lot of decommissioning items that start on page 78. So again, some of the sureties are slightly different here than they are in the counties. And that's largely for, again, solar. Wind just kind of mirrors a lot of the best practices in state statutes. This is not a big wind area. You're not in the wind zone that you're going to get wind coming here. That's up in northern Indiana. They get the wind that's actually going to be efficient. So in terms of our commercial solar wind, again, some of those things are looking at our minimum setbacks following some of the state guidance for the small and then the large as well.
So Amy, real quickly, looking at the schedule of uses,
Oh, yeah.
solar, for example, commercial solar
Mm-hmm.
would not be allowed in residential agriculture.
No.
Okay,
No,
and that's
only-
what you were talking about. They'd have to
Correct.
go to a rezoning, then they'd also have to get a special exception.
Because
So
there's not a lot of ag
Yeah.
parcels.
Yeah, and so there's only two districts.
Maximum.
There's only two districts
Correct.
where I'm using solar as an example because we have some friends here who I know that's very concerning and
Yeah.
important to them.
And we just went through all that with the.
Yep, and that's why we want to mirror what the county is doing because we've had all that public dialogue before.
Mirror it, that's fine too. That's up to you. When we talked about it as a committee, it was trying to kind of balance. Maybe there's probably not going to be as much land
Mhm.
area available under the current zoning for that. So it's probably not going to be. It's going to have multiple levels of kind of scrutiny.
But in none of these districts, commercial solar is allowed as a permitted use
Correct.
without a special exception. In only two districts, it's allowed with a special exception.
Correct.
And everything else, all these other, there's probably 10 other districts, you would have to get a rezoning and a special exception.
Correct. And the big difference too is, again, like the county's vast majority is zoned ag. You don't have a lot of ag zoning compared to the RA and your buffer. So, and we don't want it in a residential district. That's not appropriate. So,
Right.
I have. When I am done, I have the number of parcels, but a lot of that is north towards the proving grounds. It's not necessarily. We can. I have a map too if we want to look at that. Good questions though.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Mike,
Let's pass this.
for you.
I have a question about home businesses.
Yeah.
6 possible employees, so that's conceivably 2 employees, 3 shifts.
Yeah.
And home business, let's just pick an example. Somebody wants to have a dress business there and sew dresses.
Okay.
Okay, what rules? Here we have permitted land uses, general industrial light. That's not allowed in residential districts where the home business is. So what rules? Or suppose somebody wants to make small industrial parts on a couple of little CNC milling machines.
Right.
Well, that's definitely light industry, and that's not allowed. So what rules? Are these land uses moot in the case of a home industry?
No. So home-based business again is completely within your dwelling, and that's why we had it initially inside, or your accessory, like.
Well,
Garage or
exactly,
barn.
the accessory garage.
Right. So you could do like your little woodworking, like CNC type of machine in the barn or garage, right? And the idea is that I have very minimal people coming and going, and I don't even see it or know it. I don't have extraordinary people dropping off like pallets or semi trucks backing into there, and so we have stay-on deliveries on that one. So if you're doing your own little CNC 3D printing kind of thing in your barn, and if I don't notice it, that's the kind of ideas. That's not really an issue.
Has this been litigated yet? So, because frequently, like in the case of the Rikers Ridge cell tower, that hadn't been litigated at the time in our judicial district. So we were flying kind of blind on that, and we ended up going on what likely would happen. But has there been litigation that'll guide us on what kind of things that we can put in? Is there litigation on how much bother there is? Is there litigation on where the employees park? I mean, 2 employees and
Like a park,
typical.
like in an actual parking, like your driveway, or if it's public street.
Has it
lot
been
more
thought
public.
out and litigated
I don't
about
know if
if
it's
you?
been litigated. That's something we can ask the planning commission attorney about. I don't know that.
Well,
answer, so
what I'm
pass on
thinking,
it.
ma'am, if you're gonna have accessory units like this, and you're gonna have people parking, does that mean that people are gonna be paving their front yards?
So that's where we have like a maximum impervious surface in those residential districts too, so they can't pave the whole thing. By any means, they could pave a portion of that, right, depending upon what they're in. But again, the idea is that, I'm turning back to that page, so sorry about that. That again, it's not creating significant noise, traffic, or other nuisances. So the easiest way to explain it is, I can't tell you're doing it, and it looks like you just have two cars over at somebody's house is not unheard of, right? I have that most days because my mom and dad both come over at different times because they each pick a kid up from a different school, and both their cars are at my house,
But ma'am, does intent stand up in court? Because
Okay, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not gonna completely give you an answer on that.
it's
but
generally
yes,
what it
I
says.
have always been told by attorneys intent does stand up, and you can base decisions on intent. But again, I think as we start to look at, like, there's no commercial parcel delivery service, no bulk material being delivered, and using semi-tractor trailer trucks. When you start to limit all of that, it's really what can you put in your pickup truck and bring home, right? And it's by limiting the number of employees and customers, I think that, in my mind, helps to solve your issue of impacts. Because most I wouldn't know if you're there, right? Sometimes those start to come like the plumbers. They might have like 2 guys come over in the morning, load up trucks or something, and then leave. They usually have a pole barn. That's the idea of it being completely enclosed, because I don't want to see all of this stuff. So I think I'll ask a question. I'll put it. We'll ask the attorney if he has any litigation items on that. Okay. Outdoor storage was our next one, just to touch on real quick. Inoperable vehicles. City has an ordinance on that. But basically they can be stored 7 consecutive days unless they're inside. Again, if you're in the buffer and they're in your pole barn, I don't see them, that's totally fine. Or they can't be seen from an adjacent parcel or right away, that's fine. They can't be in a setback, and they have to follow all the current city ordinances if they're within the right of way. Very similar to boat, RV, heavy equipment. It needs to be parked on a gravel surface. We're gonna let 3 in per parcel in the rural districts. So it's most things in the buffer basically, and 1 in the other districts. So we don't need 3 RVs in the middle of the urban neighborhood here. And then if they're on the right of way, city ordinances are governing that items too. Okay. Parking. So it's a good one. So I wanted to point out in there are a couple things for parking reductions just in the CBD. First thing is the CBD. So in the CBD, the goal is above the coffee shop, we want that to be a loft, right? To put 1, 2, 3 units, whatever it may be. We want to encourage that and promote that so it helps build up our downtown. So some of this is based on that. The multifamily with 6 to 10 units, they can reduce their parking by 50%. Overnight accommodations can reduce theirs by 50%. This is only in CBD, right? Only in CBD. We're not expected to have some of these things. Multifamily, if it's 1 to 5 units, so it's again the 2 or 3 units that might go above the coffee shop, right? They don't have to provide parking. Other parking things we allow outside of the CBD. Only non-residential uses. Repeat that. Only non-residential uses. Apartments do not get put into this thing. Non-residential uses outside of the CBD can have an administrative reduction if they provide us calculations based on ITE, which is an industry entity or other industry standards. So I'll use an example. You've got a very specific like industrial use, right? And when you look at our parking schedule, you can base it on employees or square footage, right? Well, if it's just a different kind of thing and like you literally have 2 employees, but this big, huge, area, if you provide us the detailed use classification from ITE or another industry source that's justified, then yeah, we'll go with it, right? So it's allowing those like unique, different kind of uses to not over park, basically. But residential uses, including multifamily, cannot be reduced without a variance. So those are what they are. And we do have some standards on parking lot design. One I was going to point out, because I know I've already got a couple questions about it, so that's why I'm pointing it out. The minimum stall size is currently listed as 10 by 22 in your ordinance, which is really, really big. Typical industry standards are 9 by 18 or 10 by 20. 10 by 22 is long. So you are going to get a whole bunch of variance requests for that, if that's going to be the case. That was something the committee discussed for probably 45 minutes. So that's why it's in there at the moment, but I do want some feedback on that here eventually. But basically things to point out: you can't park in a buffer or setback. We do require some islands on parking lots that have 30 or more spaces. And we do have to do screening if it's next to a residential district. So those are all good things. Again, those right now are tucked into like various pieces of your district regulations. Let's just say it once. And then you'll notice when you go through this, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but we have parking standards. So we, again, go through our accessory uses, or basically the administrative terms that based on the use. We do have ag. So if you have employees, we have a little bit of parking required. If you don't have employees, you don't need to have parking. Or public visiting you. Then we do have residential lane uses that go into that. You'll notice that it's like 2 spaces per dwelling for a manufactured home park. We have 1.5 spaces per dwelling, except for 1 in the riverfront district for multifamily and condos, and 2 spaces per dwelling for a single and 2 family. We have commercial lane uses outlined here, and a couple of them you'll notice it's either based on square footage or number of customers. There's a footnote at the bottom of these tables that basically says they can use either one. It's not the greater or lesser. It's whatever one they think is more applicable to their business. For the large part, commercial industrial uses will provide the parking that they need. It's sometimes other uses. Some of the residential sometimes get a little bit more questionable, but eventually I find that they always do, because if not, they can't rent their units. Then we also have industrial uses and institutional uses. So want to point those out. I'm going to keep us moving here unless you have questions, holler out. But screening and buffer yards, so this is the idea of 2 incompatible or uses that could have conflicts. We want to provide a little buffer between them, right? So your buffer is either distance, additional setback, or it's some sort of vertical screening. So I'm just going to give an example of how we use this table, and then you guys can look through those standards. You have a big, long table, but I'm going to phase it in here. So if you have like ag, your rural districts are one thing. So say I was zoned rural, right, one of those rural, and I'm adjacent to, follow my arrow, all districts. This is an easy one. I don't have to provide a buffer or screening. Okay, that's a really easy one to start with. But say I'm zoned R1 or R2, right, and I am next to HDR, right? So I'm R1, my neighbor is, or R2, my neighbor is HDR. I still don't have to provide a buffer. But if I'm R1 or R2 and I'm next to general business, so I'm a single family quarter acre lot and I'm going to come in next to Walmart, I'm going to have to provide a buffer. Now granted, that's a more intense use versus the other way around, but I also find that if you don't, then they complain that their Walmart is loud. So it's minimal. We require them in this instance, and this is just new development. If they're there, this is not this is just new stuff. So 20-foot buffer, or they could do 0 if they do a type A type A. So that means they're going to put some shrubs and shade trees and evergreen trees in between us, right? So we give them options basically. So these continue for R3, CBD, RF, and HDR, and your commercial business districts. Sorry, can't talk today, and your industrial districts. So look at those. They become more intense. Industry goes next to single family. Guess what? You're putting up a whole bunch of stuff, right? And a fence, and you're buffering. So more intense, more buffer needed, basically. Signs is something else I'm just going to point out. We do have a list of exempt signs. So these ones don't have to necessarily, we're not worried about it from complying with our ordinance. They're all very basic stuff. It's like the historical markers, right? My one I always like is non-visible signs. I can't see the sign from a parcel or from the street. Does it exist? No. We are not going to regulate that. There are larger, like, commercial parcels of internal signs, and there's always the debate of, like, does that count? If I can't see it from anywhere, I'm not concerned about it, right? The other thing, we do have prohibited sign features and types. So, like, we don't want the blinking and flashing lights, right? That emulates emergency services or can be very distracting if you're next to. So there's a list of those as well. And then we go through and also list prohibited sign locations. Sorry. So we can't be in the right of way, you can't obstruct vehicle sight lines, like sight triangles, and you can't be in your setbacks. So those are pretty basic. In that section, we also have our sign tables. So we have a little graphic here of what those are. But each district is in that gray bar across. So these are our rural districts, for example. And temporary signs, I could have a yard sign, and I kind of drew a little arrow there. You can see what your normal yard sign. And this table will outline how big it can be, how tall it can be, how long I can have it, if it can be lit or not lit. So basically on this one, I can have one of those signs that's 4 foot height, 8 square feet, and I can have it when my house or whatever's for sale or lease, or I can have it 2 months out of the year, basically, right? So my kid graduates and I get the, like, fun little graduation sign, that's great. Or Joe does a new fence, and I could say Joe's fence did the sign, something of that nature. Or I could just say, I heart Madison, right? You can put anything you want on those. And then you get, in this example, the wall sign. So think about it on a house. It's mounted on your primary structure. It's just 2 square feet, so it's not big, right? And then the monument signs are just for those subdivisions, entrance signs, and this district in particular. So this gets outlined for all our different districts. So we have, again, this first one is our rural districts and our residential districts. Then we go with our downtown kind of districts with CBD and the riverfront. We go with our commercial districts and then our industrial districts. So make sure you look through those, but wanted to explain what those were. Last thing on this chapter is really fences and walls. So 3 foot fence in the front yard, 6 in the side and rear. That's your current. So we kind of kept that, but we have little graphics. We've now better defined though too. They have to be 5 foot from a right of way. That just causes issues if not. They can be placed on the property line if your neighbor agrees. And we have specifications like what that means. If they don't agree, then it could be up to the property line, right? So you put it on the property line, technically it's on their property too. And it can't be in a drainage or utility easement. That's just a good practice. And then there are a few things on manufacturing. So I'm going to pass the mic over to it. We're getting there.
Fence height,
Yes.
3 feet. Does that apply to the downtown historical district too?
Yes, that applies to all districts.
Could there be language? We had this come up in the 2016 ordinance because so many of these fences downtown are very old, beautiful iron fences, and they're like 3.5, 4 feet high. And
Okay.
should these things be destroyed or have to be replaced? It just seems to me so.
We stuck with the current. Like, a lot of times, if I can just do 3
I
or
know
4
you-
foot is the height in the front yard in my mind. I don't
Well,
necessarily.
all I'm saying is,
think
could
one
there
is-
be language in this
Yeah.
that would exempt people with existing, you know,
Well,
if
maybe
you
we
have
say
an
something
existing
about, like,
fence in the
fences,
historic
as long
district.
as if it's in the CBD and approved by the board of review, then it's okay, right? Because they're going to catch anything that's not like appropriate.
I'm just trying to keep the applications for variances to a minimum.
Or wording, maybe something with regards to wording of, like
Yeah.
fences that are contributing to the historical district or have historical
And that's where I think
value.
that we default to the board of review on that one. But I can write something in there. Yeah. I'm writing it down. Okay, I think that's good thought. No, good one, good one. So manufactured homes under our structures, we have a couple standards under that. I'm not going to totally run through these because, again, it's state statute. This is what we are allowed to regulate now. We can make them put a concrete block foundation, make them take the hitches and the axles and stuff off the front door facing the road, because that helps to orient you more like a traditional house. And then in our districts, we do have minimum living areas that comply with the state statutes, that we can't make it, you know, if it's about 950 square feet, it varies city to county, then we can't exclude them, basically. Non-conforming, I'm not going to go through the things on this chapter, but this just says, again, if you're legal today, it outlines all the standards for being still legal. Subdivisions, I know we're getting over on time here, so I'm going to kind of go through these a bit fast, but if you want to stay, I'll stay however long you want. We have a couple different types of subdivisions, but I'll run through those here quickly, but I'm not going to run through the design standards for those subdivisions. I'll just broadly say we have a lot of those design standards are included in your separate documents for the city, or if it's in the buffer, we have referenced the county's design standards on a lot of those, since those would be county roads, making sure they meet their design standards and their approvals, just so that all works and jives. But basically, there's different kinds of subdivisions. You have exempt subdivisions, so this is, they don't have to necessarily go through our subdivision process. They still have to comply with all our zoning regulations, though. But these are just things like if I need to, if I own a parcel and my neighbor does, and I need 3 feet of his parcel, I can move the line over as long as we all still comply with the regulations, right? Or the court tells us to do something, guess what, we're going to be able to do that exempt. So those are pretty standard things. Major residential subdivisions, this is 7 or more parcels. Included in that, or it includes right-of-way, because that needs to go through a different process, or public utility main extension. So we do have standards for all of these. Again, some of the highlights is just, we've got common area of 4% for major residential subdivisions. That is, I think, the same as your current, I believe. But these start to outline just basically we are going to require sidewalks throughout those as well. A minor residential subdivision is 7 or fewer parcels, and so no new roads, no utility extensions. So the idea is having an expedited process for these. And so again, we outline the same number of all of the same regulations or standards on these. We outline what districts it's allowed in. Here again, we're not going to require sidewalks internal because we don't have roads. We're not going to require street lights and all of that type of stuff. And then we did create a new one for downtown subdivisions. That's the idea of an expedited process if you're doing a subdivision downtown and it's not doing any new public infrastructure, right? Because that should be an expedited process. So they could basically go through 1 meeting to get approved versus having to go through 2 meetings, like a major residential subdivision. So all those regulations are still outlined here. Again, because we don't have infrastructure other than they do have to build the sidewalk in front of them. They would have to do that regardless. But we don't have to deal with all of that other approvals because it should be streamlined. The new one too, though, is cluster subdivision. This is something we added. And again, all the standards outlined in the document for you guys to review, but the gist of this is I'm going to use very simple terms. If I had 100 acres and I could put 100 homes on it, right? You have to be on the sewer to do these, but the idea is that my gross density doesn't change, right? It's still only 100 homes, but I can cluster them on smaller lots, and the rest of that area becomes dedicated open space. So it's maintained by the homeowners within that subdivision, so it's not a burden on the city or county to take on. And so the idea is we're not increasing density, we're just concentrating the density in one area of that subdivision, if that makes sense. And then they basically follow the standards of that major subdivision as well. So it's a little different, but I think it allows flexibility and it allows open space to be created without increasing density, overall density. Okay. And then we have our last one is the non-residential subdivisions. This is basically anything that's not exclusively residential. So it could be mixed use. That is one of those things. It could have some residential in it too, but it's not just a residential subdivision. And we outline the standards for those as well. But basically requiring those public streets or roads built to public street standards, we're requiring sidewalks and that sort of thing. Administration, these are the things that I have in front of you. I did print off at least the applications or some of the processes that are more common. So this is everything that's included in that chapter. Every procedure you might go through, plus your permits, plus some of your document stuff, and then some other procedures. The ones to kind of point out, I'm going to at least touch on really quickly, are the ones I've just highlighted. Again, as we go through some of these, you'll see spreads like this in the document. So for each procedure, you're going to have a flow chart, which is how 95% of the people will use it. It is color coded, so you say, find all of the gray things. That's the applicant, right? And then they know what they're responsible for at a quick glance. But we also have all of the words, right? We have all of the detailed description of, like, when it says request pre-application meeting, well, there's like multiple lines then that specifically tell you what that is. And then we also have applicability, like when does this process apply, right? So that's for every single one of these. And I also want to just clarify a couple of things. In each of these procedures, we have standards of evaluation. That's what's printed on the side. This is all in the draft document. I just put it on one slide for you. Findings of fact, those are important, especially for BZA. You have to be putting findings of fact in these things. So we have standards of evaluation. BZA should be making a finding for each of those facts, or for those standards. And it's gonna kind of vary. I give examples as we go through this. But BZA, if they're approving of something, they need a finding of a fact supporting each standard that they're approving it for. Special exception, variance of use, development standard, variance. Or if they're denying it, you just need one total. One reason to deny it, and that's all. But that's something that needs to be in your motions and actually documented in your approvals and in your minutes. The PC has standards of evaluation that should be referenced as a best practice. So like rezoning, there's 5 criteria you should pay reasonable regard to from Indiana code, right? So we need to reference those in our motions as well. As administrative approvals, while it's just administrative, we should be documenting that. This is how it complies, right? So nobody's questioning it tomorrow, next year, next month, 5 years from now. So I'll give some examples of those. The other thing is staff recommendations. I know you guys, a lot of your staff reports and stuff don't give a recommendation to your boards. They should be. You're hiring professional staff, they should be giving you a professional opinion. Does not mean you have to go with their professional opinion, but they should be giving you guidance. They should be giving you draft findings of facts, so you don't have to come up with those on the spot, because that's difficult, right? They can give them for and against even, right? So you need to rely on your staff and request that from your staff. If they're not, if you want additional findings, have them write up additional findings, right? If you want during a meeting for them to help you draft, what would be a finding if this is my reason? They can draft that as they, as you make your motions. So this is one of my favorite pictures too. They wouldn't let me put up a house, so I guess I put a bouncy house up. It's temporary. Fun little zoning things here. But as you go through these development plans, this is basically, it's required for non-single family, non-two family, non-agricultural things, right? You have an apartment complex coming in, you have the new Walmart coming in. Development plan review is very straightforward. Show me your drawings, show me that you comply. It's black and white. It's, do you comply with the setbacks? Do you comply with the lot area? Do you comply with the height? Yes, no. So this is an administrative approval. So basically they turn in their applications. We go through and do still sign at a docket number because it's going to be approved, right? It still goes through internal reviews. If it goes to historic board of review, that's fine. But the administrator is making the determination on this, unless the applicant requests to go to Plan Commission or the administrator requests to go there. But the big thing is there's standards of evaluation on there that you need to look at. And then basically they would move to their building permit process. So it's pretty straightforward. This is just an example of finding a fact. This is like a worksheet I've made for other communities that it's every standard that would apply to a development plan. Administrator says yes, no, or NA, and that goes in their approval, right? That's your documentation of those findings. Subdivisions I'll run through really fast too. I know we're over on time here, so sorry about that. If you do need to go, I can follow up with you. But subdivisions, they go through a primary plat, a secondary plat, process as we go through here. So primary plats, again, that's the initial drawing that you guys usually see. So it kind of outlines what we do to begin with. It does go to a plan commission. There are standards of evaluation for that. And then you get that documented decision. So you get, these standards are listed in the ordinance, but you should have a motion that references I have a checklist. All of standards were met. That's why we moved to approve it or moved to deny it. And I even gave some example motions here that I can email this out too, but your administrator can even come up with fill in the blank motions that are nice and good. But it should be referencing those findings of fact. And then your secondary plat is a very similar process, except for secondary plats can be administratively approved. So they don't need to go to planning commission if they match the primary, right? Take the primary, put the secondary on top of it, same exact thing. There's no need to go back to planning commission. If they don't match, issue, we're back to a public hearing, right? That's going back and amending our primary plat. But if they match the primary, you've already approved them. We don't need to redo that whole thing, right? When you can't legally deny that then. Because if you approve the primary and the secondary matches the primary, it needs to be approved. You can't deny that. And then, so there's standards for that are outlined. And then they start that development process. So again, your staff report should have these findings in it. If it's for the primary, they should have a motion that references all those requirements are met. Now then, our subdivisions go into construction, right? And this just outlines two different processes. The first is they build the infrastructure, you inspect it, you approve it, and then they record their plat. The second is they post a surety or bond for that infrastructure, record the plat, then they start to build it, right? You still can't have you can't get your certificate of occupancy until all your roads are built and all that stuff. But this outlines that process very clearly for you guys. And it's not really different from what you guys did today. Other ones, again, special exception variance, it follows a very similar process. It goes to BZA though. There's standards of evaluation for special exceptions. There's 6, that's state statute. And that's the note that this is what we call conditional uses today. Conditional use permits are not an Indiana thing. That is a Kentucky thing. So that is not in this new ordinance because it's not a thing. If you approve it as a special exception conditional use and nothing's changed, you can't take that away from them unless there was a time limit as a written commitment or conditional on that approval. So you can't just be like, oh, no, sorry, I'm taking it back. That doesn't work. So I wanted to point that out. Like, we won't be doing conditional use permits every year. That's a Kentucky thing. But there's standards, three standards for development standards variance and 5 for a use variance. Those are state statutes. Again, you should be making motions that include these. A finding of fact for everyone if you approve it, supporting it, or just at least one denying it. And then rezonings and PUDs, you guys are familiar with this process, basically, that it goes to Planning Commission. They make a recommendation to you guys as a legislative body, to council. There's findings of fact. Usually attorneys always will reference those as the things to pay reasonable regard to. It just means we need to discuss them and have them in our conversations, right? And then it goes to council for that final decision. Waivers, the last thing I was just going to point out is that a waiver is like a variance, but it's asking to vary from your subdivision regs, right? So that one chapter 6, am I correct if I'm guessing? Yeah, chapter 6. So if it's something they don't want to follow in chapter 6, it does not go to BZA. That is not a variance. That is a waiver. It goes to Planning Commission. That's who approves waivers. Typically, they come in with your primary plat. But that's just a distinction that gets confused sometimes. And that's something outlined in the state statute. And again, we have provisions in there. If they don't want to follow a road standard, we're going to go to Board of Works and say, hey, Board of Works, what's your opinion? You know, is this okay or not? And if you say no, then we're not going to approve that. So again, and there's standards of evaluation for that too. So all our decisions have standards of evaluation to make it much more clear. That last chapter is just terms and definitions. I didn't put anything in here for that. Thank goodness, because I'm 17 minutes late now. But, so as we're kind of wrapping up, I think the question is, do you feel overwhelmed? Or do you feel empowered to lead? Hopefully it's empowered to lead. Hopefully we're not overwhelmed, because there's lots of changes, but I think there's lots of good things that are going to happen. Josh?
I see there is a section that says that any existing building permits and some other things are going to still be in effect per the old ordinance if they're already there. What about conditional uses and variances that have been approved?
Yep,
is there language there?
Yep, very good. That's a good question. Yes, so if it's a conditional use special exception that was previously approved, and it is a special exception in the new ordinance in that district, it is considered approved. So if they don't need to go through any other approvals.
And there's language that
There
spells
is
that
language
out.
in that, yes,
Okay.
in the non-conforming chapter. The other thing it says though is the difference would be if it's not a special exception or permitted use in the new district, it becomes legally non-conforming.
Does that drive them to need to take action, or?
No, they would not need to take any action. If you're legally non-conforming, you can continue on doing exactly what you're doing. You just can't expand your building. You can't change you can't go from one legally non-conforming use to another use. You can't discontinue that use and then want to come back a couple years later and institute it again.
For variances in particular to the standards, do those, as long as the structure doesn't change, or I guess it needs to be rebuilt on the same footprint, is that?
So it depends if it's, so there's a use that could be legally non-conforming, but the structure could be
Yeah,
legally non-conforming.
the structure and the for the variance.
So we allow, if a structure is legally non-conforming, we would allow you to make changes that make it more conforming, right? So like say you wanted to take a porch off because your front setback's not conforming, that's fine. Or you wanted to add to the back of it and that would conform, that's fine. There are provisions if it's residential, because there's state statute on that, and the whole structure goes, so you can build that same thing if it's a permitted use in that same footprint. So there's a couple things on that. As long as
Does
you're not in the
our
historic
ordinance
district.
point to that state statute in reference to it or not?
Yeah, so in that chapter 5, and I can show you this right after Josh too, it references the 3674 statute on that.
Thank you, Amy,
Yeah, thank
for
you.
this.
Sorry we were
A lot of information, overwhelmed might be the right word.
No.
I would just say for everyone, it's our goal as staff to make this as thorough of a process as possible, to update what we have to 2025 standards and the best practices that are used throughout all communities in Indiana following our state statutes, and to ultimately get to a place that A, makes it very easy for our constituents, 2, makes it welcoming to those who want to invest in our community and understand the standards and processes that they usually or normally see in other communities, because right now we don't have those. And 3, for our volunteers and those appointed on boards and commissions to try to make your job easier and less confusing. We'll try to do that. Amy will be doing a number of things for us as we move forward in implementing this once we get our UDO approved through the process. Will be helping us with implementation, additional board training, making sure all our documents are, and all the checklists and all the motions and all the stuff, the technical background stuff for staff to help with our boards and our agendas. She'll be helping us through that, so she's not going to go away anytime soon. We'll be seeing her through most of next year probably, helping us with that transition to a new and improved document. So I just wanted to give you that heads up on that. And it is our intent, I think, depending on the feedback of the next couple of weeks, to be moving this process forward in January at the PC and then ultimately in early February at the City Council. We haven't set those dates yet because we're just waiting to see the feedback and the input from tonight and next week, and then we'll assess that and set those dates. But that's sort of our goal. Thank you.
If you have questions, feel free to let me know. I'll walk you through any of those. I know with a couple of you, we've already done that, and that's been helpful. So,
Well done, Amy.
thank you guys.
Thank you.
Sorry it's long, but I feel like you just have to be,
How many misspellings?
Very informative.
I've been waiting.